Texas is a wild place if you are wanting to have kids. This so there has been an update in this Kate Cox story. Kate Cox and her husband wanted to have a baby. At 20 weeks, she found out that this baby has health issues and is not viable. And so she had to go to the courts to ask to have reproductive choices that they don't have in Texas because Texas is a really restrictive state that doesn't give women reproductive choices. Anyways, she was granted reproductive care choices by a judge. But now, the newest update, Texas Supreme Court temporarily blocks pregnant women from having an emergency abortion. The court froze a lower court's ruling that would have allowed Kate Cox, who sued the state, seeking a court order abortion to obtain the procedure. Without regard to merits, the court administratively stays the district court's December 7th, 2023 order. The court noted the case would remain pending before them, but did not include any timeline on when a full ruling might be issued. Cox is 20 weeks pregnant. Her unborn baby was diagnosed with a fatal genetic condition, and she says complications in her pregnancy are putting her health at risk. Following the ruling, Cox's attorney said they remain hopeful the state's request is quickly rejected. We are talking about urgent medical care. Kate is already 20 weeks pregnant, said Molly Duane, an attorney at the Center for Reproductive Rights. This is why people should not need to beg for health care in the court of law. The ruling came just hours after Texas Attorney General Ken Paxton petitioned the High Court to intervene in this case. Paxton's petition stemmed from a ruling on Thursday by a Texas judge who granted a 14-day temporary restraining order against the state's abortion ban, so Cox could legally terminate her pregnancy. The decision marked a significant development in the ongoing debate over the state's medical exemption to its controversial ban on abortions after 6 weeks, one of the strictest in the nation. In the petition filings with the state Supreme Court, Paxton, who has threatened prosecution against anyone who helps facilitate the abortion, asked for an emergency stay of the district court's judge's ruling. So basically, you're going to go through with this. You know that it might harm you. We don't care. And yeah, you might not even be able to have babies later, despite the fact that you want them with your husband. But this is the reason why we keep saying, us pro-choice people keep saying that this is not about life. This is not about unborn babies. Because if it was about unborn babies, letting this woman take care of this medical situation wouldn't be a problem because they've already said that this baby is not viable. So if it was about unborn babies, why wouldn't you allow this woman to exercise her options? Why? Because it is about making sure that there are no rights for women, that they are here to control women, that and if you granted her this reprieve, then that means that other women might come in and need some rights too. They might continue to petition the court. So they are willing to sacrifice this woman so that other women understand that there's no reprieve here. Even if you lose your life, even if you lose your womb completely, even if these babies are not viable, you still just need to go through with it. That is where Texas is. That is where Texas is. And because of that, oh, I happen to be reading a book, and I'm going to post this up in the next part. I'm reading Mikki Kendall's, I'm sorry, it was upside down. Mikki Kendall's Hood Feminism. And I just happened to get to a section regarding reproductive justice. And so that is going to be in the next part. Here lately, I have been rereading Mikki Kendall's Hood Feminism, and I happened to get to the chapter about reproductive choices, and it matches perfectly with what is going on in Gilead, aka Texas. I'm going to read a passage for you. My brush with maternal mortality came during my fifth pregnancy. Pregnancy has always been hard for me, and I have had more miscarriages than live births. I have been pregnant 5 times, 3 of those ended in miscarriages. My fifth pregnancy turned out to be my last. It was troubled from the start. I didn't experience any of the normal indicators of pregnancy, no missed periods, and in fact, I was seeing an OBGYN who specialized in treating fibroids and endometriosis, in part because of the increased heaviness of my flow. So I found out about the pregnancy when I was already 10 weeks along. When my husband and I heard the news on account of that standard pregnancy test before surgery, which turned out to be necessary after all, we talked about it and we debated aborting. I even got as far as the clinic before we ultimately decided we would try to make it work. We had already had two sons, and while we weren't sure if we could afford a third child at that precise moment, we wanted a daughter. My doctor advised me right off the bat that she wasn't certain of a good outcome. I had large fibroids along with endometriosis, and my pregnancy would be very high risk. I did exactly what she said in terms of taking it easy, but because I wanted to give that child the best possible chance. But after another 8 weeks, the intermittent bleeding wouldn't stop. And I knew that there was a high chance that I would not be able to carry the pregnancy to term. I was taking an afternoon nap when the hemorrhaging started. Waking up to find blood gushing up my body is an experience I wouldn't wish on anyone. The placenta abruption that my doctor had listed as a possibility was happening, and I was going to have to do my best to take care of both of us. My husband was at work, and my almost 2-year old couldn't dial 911 for me, so I had to make it to the phone and make my own arrangements. I'll spare you the gory details of my personal splatter flick, but by the time I got to the hospital, I needed the smemortion that would save my life. I didn't get it immediately, despite the bleeding and my attempts to tell the story of how flawed my care from the first doctor was led to a piece on Salon and months of harassment from so-called pro-lifers, including a group that follows Jill Stanek, a former nurse best known for claiming that premature babies were being left to die in a utility closet in a hospital in Oakland, Illinois. Her followers and others sent me death threats, claiming that I had no business being pregnant because of my status as a disabled vet. I never did figure out how my bum leg and my uterus are supposed to be connected and generally did their best to make my life hell. Some even contacted my former employer in an effort to get me fired from a job that I had already left. It was harrowing, and I did my best to stand up to it while still protecting my family. Meanwhile, plenty of people who had not been in my shoes were opining on what I should have done or whether I was telling the world enough of my personal medical details and whether I was coping the right way, as though there's a guidebook for the worst moments of your life. I would like to be able to say I felt supported by feminists, but it wasn't my experience. Although mainstream feminists paid lip service to the idea that I deserved support, they mostly made demands. They wanted me to speak at rallies, to testify, to give them copies of my medical records. My article had gone viral. You see, there was no shortage of attention, though the negative reaction far outweighed the positive. Amid the lawyers and activists reaching out, no one seemed to care that I was scared, that my family was being threatened, or that I couldn't expect the same support from police that they took for granted. I was supported by the hood, by the people who put my safety and sanity above whether I was a candidate to testify before Congress. The fact that the right to have a smemortion is innately feminist is accurate. But what gets obscured is that consistent access to quality healthcare is something everyone needs at every stage of their life. And that for many is when things go awry. The first step isn't a lawsuit, it's survival. I want to go back to this first page because here, this woman and her doctor and her husband were talking about her specific health issues. I know that people don't want to hear that sometimes getting and having reproductive care is a matter of health because this woman did, in fact, want kids, but she had to weigh the issues that were already going on in her body. And what the pro life or anti choice people want to do is to take away options that women have, even when they might not be in the best of health. This woman had already said that she has had miscarriages, so she knew that her body wasn't suited for this. But so even in Illinois, where it is a blue state and we do still have reproductive care here, it was still a harrowing ordeal for this woman. So now I'm going to go to her actual Salon article because I found it because, the internet. Mikki Kendall wrote this back in 2011. Smemortion saved my life. I almost died in an emergency room because the doctor on call refused to perform a necessary procedure. There's this lawmaker out of Kansas, Peter DeGraff, who has a lot to say about smemortion. He is currently best known for saying that women should plan ahead in case of rape and not expect their regular insurance to cover a smemortion after an assault. And I could spend a lot of time discussing the flaws in his logic or even hashing out when life begins. But what I'm really concerned about is the idea that anyone besides a pregnant woman should have a say in what she does with her body after finding out she's pregnant. I'm a mom and I love my sons more than anything. And it's because I love them that I had a smemortion at 20 weeks. It was my fifth pregnancy. I'd had two earlier miscarriages, and as it turned out, my last. There was trouble from the beginning. I didn't experience any of the normal indicators of pregnancy, so I was already 10 weeks along when I found out. Okay, I'm gonna stop right there because I already went over some of this in the reading that I did of her book. I'm gonna skip down to the bottom of this. It says, everyone knew the pregnancy wasn't viable, that it couldn't be viable given the amount of blood that I was losing, but it still took hours for anyone at the hospital to do anything. The doctor on call didn't do smemortions at all, ever. In fact, no one on call that night did. Meanwhile, an ignorant batch of medical students had gathered to study me. One actually showed me the ultrasound of our dying child while asking me if it was a planned pregnancy. Several wanted to examine me while I lay there bleeding and in pain. No one gave me anything for pain or even respected my request to close the door, even though I was on the labor and delivery floor listening to other women have healthy babies as the baby I had been trying to save died in my womb. Here is a good time to insert the fact that Black women have a very high maternal mortality rate and that our pain is not listened to. When we're in pain, doctors seem to think that we have a higher tolerance of pain and ignore our requests for pain relief. She continues with, a very kind nurse risked her job to call a doctor from the reproductive health clinic to come save my life. Fortunately, she was home and got there relatively quickly. By the time she had arrived, I was in bad shape. The blood loss had rendered me nearly incoherent, but she still moved me to a different wing and got me the painkillers no one else had during the screaming hours I had spent in the hospital. After she checked my lab test, she told us I would need 2 bags of blood before she could perform the procedure. Her team, a cadre of wonderful students who should all go on to run their own clinics, took turns checking on me and my husband. They all kept assuring me that it would be over soon. I would feel much better. My husband had to sign the consent for surgery. I was clearly not competent enough to make decisions, and they took me away, along with the third bag of blood to be administered during the procedure. Later, I found out the doctor had taken my husband aside as they brought me into surgery. She promised him she would do her best to save me, but she warned him there was a distinct possibility that she would fail. The doctor who didn't do smemortion was supposed to have contacted her or someone else who would have performed the procedure immediately. He didn't. And these people are willing to allow women to pass away simply because of their religious or whatever reasonings, that they are so pro-life. So they would let this woman that has 2 kids and a husband pass away for a non-viable fetus. You guys go ahead, jump in the comments and let me know what you think of this one.